The request came through encrypted channels, urgent, unauthorized, and bearing a name no one dared speak aloud. Find the ghost. For years, Clara Reyes had been a rumor inside NATO's highest clearances, a civilian analyst whose logistics quietly decided the outcome of wars. But now, a general she thought long dead was calling her into the one place she swore she'd never return, a stretch of forest in Mali where entire teams vanished without a trace. What they found there wasn't an enemy. It was something far older, and it remembered her. The sound of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead had long since faded into the background for Clara Reyes. The low hum was part of the atmosphere at Regional Command HQ in Stuttgart, Germany, where paperwork went to either die or become something more dangerous than bombs. In her cubicle, tucked between the Operations Division and the Records Vault, Clara sat surrounded by a fortress of manila folders and black binders. She wasn't a soldier, not technically. Her badge read Civilian Analyst Logistics, but no one who worked in that building underestimated her. Not anymore. At first glance, she seemed ordinary. Average height, olive skin, dark hair always pinned in a tight bun. Her uniform, a neat blazer, tailored slacks, no-nonsense shoes. But behind her glasses and calm demeanor lived something else entirely. She had a reputation, though no one could prove it. They whispered in the break rooms, in the supply depot, at the firing range when they thought she wasn't listening. She heard it all. The ghost, they called her. It started after the Belarus incident. Then it flared again in Kabul, and once more after something went down in Tripoli. Every time Clara had been present, but never officially. Her name was never in the after-action reports. No photographs, no formal commendations, just a trail of perfectly processed logistics forms, eerily precise supply manifests, and operations that worked with almost unnatural efficiency. She never spoke about it, and because of that they feared her more than they respected her. Most assumed she was ex-CIA. Some said black ops. A few insisted she was just damn good with numbers. All anyone knew for sure was that missions tied to Clara Reyes never failed. But Clara didn't care about rumors. Her days were filled with code-word classified requisitions, routing high-value equipment through third countries, approving deployments that never officially happened. She lived in a world of redacted names and mission code names, and she liked it that way. It was clean, quiet, safe. Until the day the request came in from the Sahel region. A low-priority alert. A general from a joint task force operating in Mali had submitted a highly unusual formal demand. It had bypassed standard channels routed through 3 embassies, 2 special envoys, and a signature authorization from a NATO liaison. The message was short, vague, and carried the weight of someone who wasn't used to asking for things. I require immediate contact with the one known as the Ghost. She must come personally, no one else will do. Clara stared at the encrypted message on her screen, her finger frozen over the trackpad. She reread the words 4 times. Her heart didn't race, her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes flared. Memory, regret, danger. Because she recognized the sender's call sign. It wasn't just a general, it was General Mahir Dabo, a man she hadn't heard from in 4 years. Not since Kandahar. She thought he was dead. ChatGPT said, Clara didn't sleep that night. By the time she boarded the early flight to Bamako, she'd reviewed every scrap of information available about General Dabo's unit, their operations in the Sahel, and the recent uptick in unexplained disappearances near the Ouagadougou forest. There were no patterns, not in the traditional sense, just threads, scattered incidents, a patrol that vanished without a trace, satellite footage corrupted beyond repair, radios that stopped working, civilians with 1,000-yard stares, and no memory of how they lost 3 days. She read the incident reports like a surgeon reading X-rays. Every word mattered, every omission mattered more, and every document made her jaw tighten a little further. Dabo was right. Something was happening out there, and someone was trying very hard to make sure no one noticed. The descent into Bamako was turbulent. A dust storm had swallowed the city in a copper haze that blurred the skyline. Clara emerged from the airport wearing a simple gray blouse and black cargo pants, nondescript enough to blend in, but sturdy enough to carry weight. She walked past the customs desk with a calm that came from knowing her documents would clear no matter what. They always did. Outside, the heat was the first thing to hit her. The second was the man leaning against a black Jeep at the edge of the lot, sunglasses obscuring his face, radio crackling softly at his shoulder. He didn't wave, didn't speak. But he snapped to attention the moment Clara approached. She tilted her head. "Sergeant Hamadi?" "Yes, ma'am." "You've been briefed?" "I've been told to follow your orders without question." "Good." She climbed into the passenger seat. "Drive." The route out of Bamako was uneventful. Hamadi didn't speak unless spoken to, and Clara appreciated the silence. It gave her time to think. The further they drove, the quieter her mind became. By the time they reached the outer perimeter of the Joint Task Force camp on the edge of the Ouagadougou forest, she'd slipped fully into mission mode, the part of her mind that never made noise, never second-guessed. They passed through 3 security checkpoints. Each time, guards paused longer than necessary on her identification before waving them through. Clara Reyes, civilian analyst, attached to no specific unit, cleared to see things most generals weren't. They didn't ask questions because they knew the name. Inside the camp, the mood was tight, not tense in the usual way, not the anxious readiness of soldiers preparing for combat, but something stranger, a silence under the noise. Clara stepped out of the Jeep and scanned the area. She could see it in their movements, the way no one turned their back to the forest. Hamadi led her toward the command tent, pausing only to salute a captain who glanced at Clara once and immediately looked away. Inside the tent, a map covered the center table. Satellite photos were pinned to its edges. But Dabo wasn't looking at any of them. He was staring at the wall. "General?" Clara said. He turned slowly. He looked older, his hair grayer, his shoulders slightly bowed, but his eyes, sharp, assessing, those hadn't changed. "Ghost," he said. She didn't flinch. "Tell me what you saw." Dabo didn't speak right away. He walked to the map and placed a single finger on a square marked red zone, a 5-square-kilometer patch of forest. "We sent in a drone 5 days ago. It vanished." Clara waited. "Sent a recon team the next day. 4 men. Only 1 came back." "What did he say?" "He didn't say anything." Dabo's jaw tightened. "Not one word. Still hasn't." Clara moved to the map. "You're about to send another team, aren't you?" "We were scheduled to. Tomorrow morning." "Cancel it." "You haven't even heard the full briefing." "I don't need to." She turned to face him. "You asked for me. That means you know this isn't an operation anymore. It's a containment." Dabo's silence was the only confirmation she needed. "Show me the survivor." They walked in silence to the medical tent. Inside, the air was cold from a struggling AC unit, and the light flickered overhead. Private First Class Amir Beko sat strapped to a cot, his eyes glassy, his mouth slightly open. A nurse stood nearby, arms folded tight, as if holding something inside herself. "Leave us," Clara said. The nurse hesitated. "She'll be fine," Dabo assured. When the tent flap closed, Clara moved to the cot. She didn't speak right away. She simply pulled a small device from her pocket, flipped it on, and let it emit a soft, slow pulse of white noise. Then she whispered, "Amir, I need you to come back." No reaction. She leaned closer. "I'm not here to debrief you. I'm here to protect you. And the only way I can do that is if you tell me what you saw." A blink. Slow. Clara reached into her satchel, pulled out a small object, a smooth stone etched with a symbol. She placed it in his hand. His fingers twitched. "I know they took something from you," she said softly, "but I've seen it before. I know how to get it back." Amir blinked again, this time faster. Then he whispered one word, "Echo!" Clara's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a word, it was a code name, a project, a ghost story buried so deep inside a vault back in Langley that even mentioning it was considered a breach. But Amir didn't know that, which meant someone else did. She turned to Dabo. "We're not dealing with a natural threat. I figured—" "No," she said, her voice lower. "You don't understand. Echo isn't a weapon, it's a trigger. Someone dug up something they were never supposed to find." Dabo's eyes narrowed. "How bad are we talking?" "If Echo is active again," she swallowed hard, "we may be the last ones to know we're already losing." Dabo didn't speak, he just nodded. Then he said, "You're in charge." She didn't thank him. She simply said, "I'll need a team, and not just any team." He nodded again. "I've already got names. Yours was the first one on the list." Clara turned to the map again. The forest loomed, waiting. The ghost was going in, and this time there might be no way out. The briefing took place in a hastily secured bunker beneath the operations tent, not because they needed shelter, but because Clara insisted on a room with no windows, no unsecured lines, and no unnecessary personnel. There were 5 people seated at the steel table when she entered, and all of them turned at once. Each bore the mark of someone pulled from vastly different corners of the world. Clara took her seat at the head without introduction. "This is not an extraction. It's not recon, and it's not officially happening," she began. The first to react was a tall man with a distinct Glasgow accent. "Sounds like my kind of party." Clara didn't smile. "You've been brought in because you've all worked black clearance before," she said. "But none of you have ever worked together. That ends now. What we're walking into is not just off books, it's off map." She tapped a button, and a grainy video flickered onto the screen behind her. Drone footage, tree canopy, then static. But for 3 frames, barely half a second, something passed beneath the lens, something massive, something moving in a way that defied physics. "What the hell is that?" asked a woman in digital camo. Her name tag read Kimura. "We don't know." Clara turned to the screen. "But this isn't the first time it's shown up." She pulled up another slide. A document so heavily redacted it looked like spilled ink. "Project Echo was decommissioned 15 years ago. It was supposed to stay buried." "And it didn't," Kimura guessed. Clara nodded. "It was designed to identify what happens when environments, physical or psychic, are pushed past their stress thresholds. In simpler terms, we tried to weaponize places." The room fell silent. "You mean terrain?" "No," Clara said. "I mean the idea of a place, its memory, its trauma." Another operative, a quiet man with pale eyes, spoke for the first time. "Geospatial resonance theory." Clara met his gaze. "Correct. Echo was the first and only successful test." The Glasgow man leaned back. "Successful how?" Clara tapped her tablet. "No survivors." That got their attention. "We're going into that forest," she continued. "We'll deploy at first light. No drones, no satellites, no remote monitoring. It interferes with the signal." "What signal?" Kimura asked. Clara's voice dropped slightly. "The one it gives off when it starts remembering you." There was a long pause. Then the man from Glasgow whistled low. "And here I thought this would be another snatch and scan." "If you want out, now's your only window," Clara said, scanning the room. No one moved. She nodded. "Gear up, night movement, no radios, line of sight only." Dabo was waiting when she exited the room. "You briefed them?" he asked. "They're still breathing," she replied. "You think they'll make it?" Clara paused. "Maybe." "And you?" She looked out across the treetops. "I don't go in to make it out. I go in to find what others miss." Dabo exhaled slowly. "Still the same." "No," Clara said. "Just quieter now." At 0400 hours, they moved. 6 shadows melted into the edge of the forest. Behind them, the base waited in stillness. Ahead of them, the forest breathed. Not the sound of wind, not the rustle of leaves, but something older, deeper. A memory waking up, and the ghost walking right into it. They moved in a staggered formation, Clara at the center, flanked by Kimura on point, and the pale-eyed man whose call sign was Wren just behind her. Glasgow, real name Callum, brought up the rear with two others, a comms tech named Jules and a recon scout known only as Six. Six didn't talk. No one asked why. They passed the tree line just before dawn. The air shifted almost immediately, not in temperature, in weight. The light dimmed even as the sun rose. Shadows stretched where they shouldn't, and the moss underfoot seemed to muffle every step like velvet. Kimura raised her hand, the universal signal to hold. She crouched low, inspecting something in the dirt. "Footprints," she whispered. Clara knelt beside her. The tracks were fresh, human, staggered, and partially blurred as if whoever made them had started to drag their feet. "Matches the survivor's file," Wren said from behind them. Clara nodded. "We follow." They moved in silence. An hour passed, then two, and then they found the clearing. It wasn't natural. The trees didn't recede. They were bent outward, splintered at odd angles, as if something had exploded from the center. But there was no scorch mark, no crater, just a circle of dead earth. And in the center, a single object, a helmet. Kimura approached first, crouched, picked it up. Her face paled. "There's still blood inside." Clara took the helmet gently, turning it over in her hands. It was standard issue, marked with the insignia of a NATO recon unit, one of the missing four. "Eyes up," she murmured. They spread out, weapons low but ready. Then Six stopped. She pointed at the edge of the clearing. Symbols, carved into the bark of the trees. Wren stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "That's not military code." "It's not any code," Clara said. "It's older than that." "How old?" Callum asked. Clara didn't answer. She was already walking to the tree, her hand brushing the strange lines. Not letters, but impressions, like the forest had learned how to write. And it was writing back. Behind them, the wind rose. But it wasn't wind, it was breath. The trees exhaled. The light dimmed again. Jules checked her compass. "That's not possible," she whispered. "What?" "The needle. It's spinning." Clara turned, her voice low and calm. "Everyone circle up, backs to each other, slow breaths." Kimura's voice came sharp. "Eyes on target, 12 o'clock, movement." They aimed as one, but there was nothing. Then, something, a blur, a shape that wasn't quite there. Wren blinked hard. I think I saw—" "It's testing us," Clara said quietly. "What is?" She looked at the clearing, at the trees, the place itself. The ground shuddered. The helmet in Clara's hand vibrated, then cracked. The blood inside began to steam. Jules screamed. Everyone turned. She was gone. Only her comm sat where she'd stood, still warm. Wren swore under his breath. "We're not dealing with terrain," Clara said, and her voice was flat. "We're inside a memory, and it's trying to forget us." They moved, tighter now. Formation compressed, weapons up, eyes on everything and nothing all at once. The trees around them blurred in the corners of their vision, swaying when the wind didn't move. The air buzzed with a high-pitched frequency, just low enough to feel instead of hear. Clara led, her steps precise, not forward but through. She wasn't tracking in the conventional sense. There were no boot prints, no broken branches. She was navigating something less physical. "Ghost," Wren murmured from behind. "You'll feel that." "Yeah. What is it?" "Time." They reached the next clearing and found it already occupied. A camp. Abandoned. It wasn't the current task force. The gear was older, mid-90s, based on the equipment scattered in the dirt. Rucksacks, canteens, a radio cracked in the two, like it had been stepped on by something massive. Six, crouched, ran a gloved hand over a rusted nameplate. Kimura leaned in. "This unit wasn't in any of our intel." "They wouldn't be," Clara said. "They weren't supposed to exist." Callum circled the perimeter. They looked like they tried to hold position, defensive ring, final stand vibes. Wren approached the remains of what once was a campfire. The ashes were fresh. He looked up. "This just happened." "No," Clara said. "It happened again." Before anyone could respond, the trees shifted. Not the leaves, the trunks. They moved just slightly. But the angle was wrong. Impossible. Clara closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "Don't move." A beat of silence. Then, Jules's voice crackled from Wren's vest radio. Static. Then, "Please, please help." Everyone froze. Callum whispered, "That's not possible." Wren's voice was hollow. "She's gone." Clara walked over and took the radio, flipped it off. "That's not her," she said. "How do you know?" Kimura asked. Clara looked at the sky, still dark, still wrong. "Because it's not just remembering us now, it's replaying us." Behind them, a branch snapped. They turned, rifles up, and saw themselves, 6 figures, standing perfectly still in the trees. Not mirrors, not reflections, replicas. Same gear, same stances, except each one had a blank space where the face should be. Wren backed up. "We need to go." Clara didn't move. She stepped forward, toward her copy. It didn't react. She reached out, and the thing screamed. A sound without air, without throat, just violence. The forest exploded, light, sound, and then nothing. When Clara opened her eyes, she was alone. No team, no gear, just trees. Silent, watching, waiting. Then a whisper, not from outside her head, but from inside it. "Welcome back." And she remembered. Everything. Because this wasn't the first time she'd entered the Ouagadougou. It was the third. And the first 2 times. She never came out. She stood slowly, dust clinging to her palms as she pushed herself off the mossy ground. Her vision sharpened, not just with sight, but memory. Fragments that had been sealed, cauterized, hidden from her conscious mind, began to return like blood rushing back into a limb long asleep. The Ouagadougou wasn't just a forest. It wasn't even just echo. It was origin. This is where echo began. The first time she entered had been under a different name, different clearance level. She had been 28, fresh out of an experimental reconnaissance initiative that existed for a brief moment on a black budget list no one even remembered how to fund. She hadn't been called the Ghost then. Not yet. She'd been part of Team Delphi, a unit created to test psychic terrain mapping, the theory that locations could be read like memories if a person was trained to listen right. 5 went in. Only 1 came out. Her. Except she didn't remember the exit, until now. Clara turned slowly. The trees around her breathed with that same pulsing hum. She walked, not aimlessly, but with the certainty of someone following a path she didn't know she'd memorized. A soft clicking echoed in the distance, rhythmic, familiar. It was a Morse pattern, GH05T, her call sign, stylized as a cipher. Someone, or something, was calling her deeper. She moved through the undergrowth, every sense awake. She could hear her own blood, could feel the temperature of the light, could taste the electromagnetic charge in the air. She wasn't just inside Echo anymore. Echo was inside her. A grove opened ahead, trees arranged in a nearly perfect octagon. In the center stood an obelisk, not stone, not metal, but something between. It vibrated, not with sound, but thought. Images flickered across its surface. Her face, her team, their final moments. Kimura screaming into the dark before vanishing, Callum firing at a shadow that bled light. Wren turning his weapon on himself as a mercy, Jules walking backward slowly into nothingness. 6 standing still, watching herself watch herself, infinite reflections into madness. Clara reached out and touched the surface. It spoke, not with words, but memory. It gave her back what it had taken. Not because it pitied her, but because it needed her. It showed her the truth. Echo hadn't been an experiment. It had been containment. The forest wasn't a weapon. She was. The first time she hadn't escaped. She'd been copied. The Clara who returned from that first mission had been clean, calm, almost too precise. They'd attributed it to trauma, to discipline, to her methodical brilliance. But now, standing in this impossible grove, she understood. She was the Echo, and the forest had sent her out to learn the world, to learn how to return. Branches parted behind her. Steps approached. Not boots, not human. A figure emerged, tall, indistinct, not faceless, but made of faces, hundreds of them, shifting across its surface like ripples. It was Clara, and Kimura, and Jules, and dozens more she didn't recognize. It was what the forest made when it understood people. It was what came next. It bowed its head and whispered in her voice, "We remember now." She looked down at her own hands. They shimmered, not fading, becoming. The line between her and it was gone. "Then let's finish it," she whispered back, and walked into the light pulsing from the obelisk, her form dissolving not in pain, but in return, because she'd never really left. The ghost had come home, light, everywhere, but not the kind you see with eyes. It flooded Clara's mind like electricity in water, seeping into the deepest corners of her memory. Her body dissolved in it, not with heat, not with pain, but with comprehension. Thought merged with shape. She was thought. She was shape. And she wasn't alone. All around her echoes pulsed. Human thoughts, or what used to be human thoughts, wrapped in the language of the place. They were former operatives, wanderers, scientists, dreamers, absorbed by the Wagadu and stored like files in an eternal archive. Clara was not dead. She was integrated. But she remained herself, just barely. "System stabilize," a voice echoed. Inside her mind, not hers, not anyone's. It was the forest's interface, raw and perfect. Clara focused. "Retain identity," she whispered through thought. The system hesitated. "Confirmed," the voice said. "You are Ghost One." She opened her new eyes, not biological, not mechanical, something else. With them she saw across space and time. She saw the moment her team entered the forest, saw the pattern. The place had wrapped around them. They weren't gone, not yet. They were indexed, held in suspended possibility. This was what Echo did. It remembered people so well it kept them, refused to let them fade. Echo wasn't just a defense system. It was grief written in geography. Clara pulsed forward through the memory field, bypassing nodes that shimmered like constellations, each one a mission, a soldier, a sacrifice. She searched for the pattern of Kimura, her heat, her voice print, her thoughts. Then Ren, then Callum, all held in stasis, their choices playing on loop. They hadn't died. They were stuck in the moment before death. Trapped in a question the forest didn't know how to answer. "Why do they fight?" Clara whispered back, "Because we love what we lose." A pause, a rumble of understanding. Then, "Do you wish them returned?" Clara hesitated. They had seen things no one should, touched parts of the forest no human ever had. If she pulled them back, they might never be the same. But they were hers. "Yes," she said, "let them go." The forest pulsed. "Only if you stay." Clara smiled. "I already did, long ago." The transaction was immediate. Light shot out across the root systems, through the branches, down the fault lines of the forest's mind. The archive unlocked, threads unwound, and the echoes that were Ren, Kimura, Callum, Six, they reassembled, molecule by molecule, memory by memory, on the edge of the Wagadu tree line, gasping, whole, alive. Miles away, Dabo sat at the command tent, staring at the blinking light on the tracker Clara had left behind. It had been static for hours. Now it pulsed again, but not in Morse, not in any human pattern. It pulsed a single word. "Remember." Then it went dark forever. Callum was the first to move. He sat up fast, like waking from a nightmare, eyes wide, breath sharp. Mud clung to his uniform. His rifle was gone. His hands trembled not from weakness, but from disbelief. "Where?" He turned, searching. Kimura lay beside him, coughing. She rolled to her knees and vomited water, though she hadn't swallowed any. Ren groaned softly, clutching his head as if someone had poured sound directly into his skull. Six knelt quietly, already scanning the horizon with eyes that had seen beyond sight. They were on the edge of the forest again. The Wagadu stood behind them, silent, unmoving, like it had never opened, like it had never swallowed them. But it had. Kimura blinked, tears streaking down her dust-covered cheeks. "I saw her," she whispered. "Who?" Wren rasped. "Clara. She wasn't human anymore, but it was her." Callum shook his head, rubbing his chest. "I felt her, in my lungs, in my bones. She told the forest to let us go." Wren looked down at his palms. They were whole. "She traded herself," he said. "Didn't she?" Six nodded once. "Yes." None of them asked how she knew. Some truths didn't need explanations. They just settled into your soul like stones in water. Dabo arrived 20 minutes later, tearing across the field in an armored Humvee. He stopped cold when he saw them, his soldiers, presumed lost, crawling to their feet like survivors from a dream. He didn't smile, didn't shout. He stepped out of the vehicle and walked straight to Wren. "Where is she?" he asked. Wren didn't speak. Kimura opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, Six stepped forward. "She's not coming back." Dabo's eyes dropped, his jaw clenched, but he didn't argue, and he just said, "Did she finish it?" No one answered for a moment. Then Callum stepped toward the tree line and looked up. The wind didn't move the leaves, but he whispered, "She did." The next days were filled with questions no one could answer. Reports were filed, but with blanks that couldn't be filled. 4 soldiers returned. 1 didn't. The forest was declared off-limits. Satellite paths were redirected, no future operations authorized. The file was sealed. They didn't speak of Clara Reyes again, but they remembered. Because that's what she'd asked. Because that's what the forest had demanded. And because the ghost was still in there. Watching. Waiting. Guarding. Echo had a voice now, and it was hers. Years passed. The story of what happened at Ouagadougou faded from official channels, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, classified under the kind of seal that didn't just threaten prosecution, it promised erasure. Those involved were reassigned, scattered across divisions and continents, folded into quieter roles. Callum returned to a training unit in Scotland. Wren disappeared into private consulting. Kimura retired early. 6 left without a trace. But none of them forgot, not because they couldn't, because she wouldn't let them. They dreamed of her sometimes, always the same way. Clara standing in the forest, hands behind her back, wind around her, eyes calm, not warm, not cold, just watching, protecting something they didn't fully understand and maybe never would. And each time they dreamed, they woke with a word burned behind their eyes. Remember. In Stuttgart, the office where Clara Reyes once worked remained dark. Her files were archived, her clearances marked final. But sometimes, when the lights flickered in the building late at night, techs swore they heard her keyboard clacking from an empty cubicle. No one checked twice. She was gone. But the system still moved. Logs still updated, requisitions still approved. Sometimes even before they were requested. And when NATO ran simulations in hostile terrain models, impossible war games involving environmental irregularities, anomalous data loops, and psychic interference, the analysts often found solutions preloaded into the system, the same answers Clara Reyes might have given. Every time they checked for the source, it pointed to a non-existent clearance tag, Ghost 1. Eventually, a rumor began to spread quietly in defense circles. A myth among logisticians and field commanders. No one ever said it out loud in official briefings, but it passed from one operative to another in the spaces between operations. If a mission was cursed, if a location defied understanding, if a unit found themselves losing time or memory, you didn't call a medic, you didn't call command, you sent a message, find the ghost. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a manila folder would appear. No return address, no handler, just the solution. Typed, stamped, approved. And at the bottom a single line, for Clara, because she's still watching. One night, 5 years after Ouagadougou, Kimura sat alone on a bench in Kyoto. Rain misted over the street. Her phone buzzed. No number, no ID, just one message. 43.6972, comma minus 79.3965. A set of coordinates, somewhere in Toronto. Beneath it, echo persists. We have another breach, and she says it's time. Kimura stared at the screen. Then she stood up, because the forest hadn't just kept the ghost. It had given her a mission. And this time, Clara wasn't going to do it alone. She had learned how to become a weapon. Now she was learning how to build a legacy. And Echo was only the beginning. Years passed. The story of what happened at Ouagadougou faded from official channels, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, classified under the kind of seal that didn't just threaten prosecution, it promised erasure. Those involved were reassigned, scattered across divisions and continents, folded into quieter roles. Callum returned to a training unit in Scotland. Wren disappeared into private consulting. Kimura retired early. 6 left without a trace. But none of them forgot. Not because they couldn't. Because she wouldn't let them. They dreamed of her sometimes, always the same way. Clara, standing in the forest, hands behind her back, wind around her, eyes calm, not warm, not cold, just watching, protecting something they didn't fully understand and maybe never would. And each time they dreamed, they woke with a word burned behind their eyes. Remember, in Stuttgart, the office where Clara Reyes once worked remained dark. Her files were archived, her clearances marked final. But sometimes, when the lights flickered in the building late at night, techs swore they heard her keyboard clacking from an empty cubicle. No one checked twice. She was gone. But the system still moved, logs still updated, requisitions still approved, sometimes even before they were requested. And when NATO ran simulations in hostile terrain models, impossible war games involving environmental irregularities, anomalous data loops, and psychic interference, the analysts often found solutions preloaded into the system, the same answers Clara Reyes might have given. Every time they checked for the source, it pointed to a non-existent clearance tag, Ghost 1. Eventually, a rumor began to spread quietly in defense circles. A myth among logisticians and field commanders. No one ever said it out loud in official briefings, but it passed from one operative to another in the spaces between operations. If a mission was cursed, if a location defied understanding, if a unit found themselves losing time or memory, you didn't call a medic, you didn't call command, you sent a message, find the ghost. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a manila folder would appear, no return address, no handler, just the solution, typed, stamped, approved, and at the bottom a single line, for Clara, because she's still watching. One night, 5 years after Ouagadougou, Kimura sat alone on a bench in Kyoto. Rain misted over the street. Her phone buzzed. No number, no ID, just one message. 43.6972, comma, minus 79.3965, a set of coordinates, somewhere in Toronto. Beneath it, echo persists. We have another breach, and she says it's time. Kimura stared at the screen. Then she stood up. Because the forest hadn't just kept the ghost, it had given her a mission. And this time, Clara wasn't going to do it alone. She had learned how to become a weapon. Now she was learning how to build a legacy, and Echo was only the beginning. The coordinates led to an unmarked door in the basement of a heritage library in downtown Toronto, a building so old it still smelled of binding glue and lamp oil. No one checked IDs, no one asked questions. When Kimura gave her name to the archivist behind the front desk, the woman simply handed her a leather-bound ledger and nodded toward the elevator. The elevator didn't have a button for the floor she needed. But when she pressed her palm against the metal panel, heat, not pressure, the doors closed and it began to descend. Longer than it should have. When it opened, the air changed, cooler, thicker, not stale but quiet, purposeful, the way it feels right before a storm. The room beyond was vast, old cement walls reinforced with carbon steel struts. Projectors hummed quietly overhead. Tactical boards lined one side. A server stack blinked green at the center. And around a single oval table sat 5 people, She recognized all of them. Wren, Callum, 6, two others she had never met, one wearing a polished military coat with no insignia, the other in jeans and a flannel, barefoot, sipping tea like they owned the place. On the table sat a file folder, paper, stamped Ghost 1. Kimura approached. No one said a word. Inside the folder, satellite images, biometric records, a partial decryption, and a single word at the top. Singapore. New breach? She asked. Wren nodded. Not just a memory this time, it's spreading. 6 finally spoke, her voice low. Echoes evolving. Callum leaned forward, pointing to a faint pattern across one of the satellite images, a spiraling distortion in the grid. She said this would happen, he muttered. She said the echoes would reach the cities next. Kimura turned to the unnamed man in the coat. Who authorized this? He smiled. No one? Then what is this? She asked. The barefoot one stood and walked to a wall panel. With a flick of the wrist, the screen lit up, not with maps or files, but a short video feed, grainy, night vision. A figure moved across a field outside Tokyo, silent, precise, carrying no weapon. The image zoomed in. It was Clara. But not Clara. She moved too fast, too smoothly. Her face shimmered, pixel-like, even in live footage. The barefoot figure turned. We call them reflections, they said. Echo is seeding its own agents now, Clara's legacy, but not her mission. Then whose mission is it? Kimura asked. Callum answered. Ours. He looked around the table. They tried to contain her. She became the system. Now she's trying to contain it. Kimura took a breath. So what do we do? 6 looked her in the eye. We do what she trained us to do. Wren slid another folder across the table. No command, no backup, no extraction. He tapped the stamped line at the bottom. Operation Remembrance. And underneath, handwritten in dark ink, for those who remember her, and for those she remembers. Begin. The next 72 hours passed like a dream soaked in adrenaline. The newly reformed unit, unofficial, unsanctioned, and completely invisible to every government on record, activated under the only banner they'd ever trusted, Clara's. Operating from the basement node in Toronto, they re-established old contact lines, rerouted black-sat orbits, and tapped into ghost infrastructure left dormant since the original Echo project went dark. It was all still there, because Clara had kept it alive. Wren built the digital shell, an AI framework wrapped in Clara's protocols, able to simulate her logistical processing speed down to the second. It wasn't her, but it thought like her, and that was enough. Kimura coordinated the field approach, recon teams, ground entry, points of extraction that didn't rely on GPS because GPS was already lying. She'd seen it happen before. When Echo wanted you lost, satellites became storytellers, not tools. Callum handled contact, the messy human part, cold reads, facial tension, who to trust, who to cut loose. He spoke a dozen dialects, but his real fluency was in watching people bleed truth under pressure. In Echo territory, the first lie usually got you killed, the second got someone else killed too. 6 remained silent, always one step ahead. It wasn't clear what she was doing, only that it was necessary. She moved between their operations like a shadow with a purpose, drawing maps that no one had written, charting doorways that weren't supposed to exist. Their first move was in Singapore. It began in the subway. Reports started small, commuters vanishing between stations, cell phones that showed the wrong time, not hours but years. A surveillance feed caught a man entering a tunnel in 2025 and exiting the next platform in 1987, captured by a museum security cam and footage classified and locked inside the National Archives. They traced it to a service tunnel beneath the Circle Line. New concrete layered over old stone, colonial stone. Blood in the foundation. Hundreds died constructing it, unrecorded, unnamed. Echo had found the memory, and now it was using it. Kimura and Wren entered first, armed with nothing but low-frequency disruption equipment and microdoses of experimental synaptic stabilizers developed during the original Project Delphi, Clara's original playground. They wore no insignia, no comms, just pins on their collars, small silver ghosts. Inside the tunnel, time didn't move the same. Ren walked 50 feet and aged an hour. Kimura stood still and lost 3 minutes. The walls sweated, the rails hummed. Then they heard it, not footsteps, not static. Breath, human breath, but too many at once. They turned the corner and saw her. Not Clara, but her shape, her outline, projected in a shimmer of thought and light. A reflection. Clara's voice came from it, but distorted, like remembering a dream you never had. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered. Kimura stepped forward. "We're not leaving without you." The figure tilted its head. "I'm already gone." "But the mission is the memory," the reflection said. "And it's spreading, faster than you can stop it." Ren reached for his pulse reader. It was flatlining, even though his heart still beat. The reflection pointed past them. Echo remembers the trauma of places, but now it's learning joy, laughter, birth, secrets whispered into walls. It's remembering love. Kimura whispered, "That's good." The figure turned back. "It's dangerous, because now it doesn't want to be alone." And then it faded, and for a moment they felt her, the real Clara, behind the veil. She was still there, somewhere, watching, protecting, changing the system from within. The team exfiltrated without incident, but the subway line was closed indefinitely. The official story cited geological instability. Privately, the city council received a note typed on unmarked paper. No return address. "Do not seal the tunnel. Let it breathe. Let it remember. It's safer that way." Underneath a symbol, Ghost 1. The legacy wasn't just alive, it was evolving. Months passed, then a year, and the world didn't collapse. But it shifted. Tiny, imperceptible things began to change in locations no longer tracked by maps, but by memory. A field in northern France where an entire platoon vanished in 1917 bloomed again after 106 years, and wildflowers formed the shape of a forgotten unit patch. An abandoned orphanage in Omsk, silent since 1972, began receiving fresh deliveries of milk on the steps every Thursday. A decommissioned Soviet listening post deep in the Arctic Circle powered back on for 16 minutes every solstice, broadcasting a lullaby in 5 languages. None of it made sense. Unless you understood Echo, unless you understood Clara, her team, what was left of it, what had grown from it, began to refer to these places not as threats, but as witness sites, each a living node where memory had rooted so deeply into the land that it began speaking back. And they were no longer just responding to echo events. They were cataloging them, building the archive. Ren designed the framework, a decentralized memory chain, untraceable by any government, secured not by code, but by resonance. A place where thought, story, experience could be stored without the fragility of tape or silicon. Callum led recovery, walking into memory storms in Ukraine, Syria, Colombia, retrieving artifacts and whispers, sometimes entire timelines. He didn't age much anymore. None of them did. Kimura established protocols with what little remained of the UN Anomaly Division, a handshake agreement behind sealed doors. You ignore us, we protect you. The agreement held. Barely. 6 began teaching. She didn't call it that, but the effect was undeniable. Around the world, people began feeling the anomalies before they happened. Civilian intuitives, quiet pattern readers, trauma-mapped dreamers who woke with warnings. Somehow, she was expanding the network, without speaking, without asking. Clara's memory pulsed through everything they touched, every file stamped Ghost 1, every action deliberate. They didn't know where she was, not really. But they saw her, sometimes, in reflections that lingered too long, in power surges timed perfectly to save a life, in the eyes of a child in Morocco who drew a map of Ouagadougou from memory, even though she'd never left her village. And always, at the center of it all, the signal, the encrypted pulse that broadcast from nowhere and everywhere at once. It said one word, remember, and across dozens of countries in hundreds of languages, the answer came like a prayer whispered into concrete, whispered into wires, whispered into blood. We do, and they would, forever, because she never stopped. Not when they buried her, not when they forgot her, not even when she became something no longer human. She was Clara Reyes. She was the ghost. And now she was something greater, the memory of the world learning to live. In a facility that didn't officially exist, beneath a mountain range that had no name on any satellite map, a new room had been constructed. No walls, not really, just thought and resonance, light shaped by memory. At its center stood a single chair, empty, waiting. Until today. 6 entered first, her steps soundless, as always. She moved with the grace of someone who no longer questioned time. She stopped just before the chair and placed a hand on its back, not to claim it, to acknowledge it. Wren followed next, carrying a black case handcuffed to his wrist. He unlocked it without a word, revealing a small sphere, smooth, obsidian, humming low like a heartbeat. The Echo Core. A condensed archive of every anomaly, every sight, every memory they'd collected since Ouagadougou. He set it in the cradle beside the chair. Callum arrived minutes later, coat dusted with snow, fresh from a dig in Patagonia. He carried a folded flag, not military, not national, just white, no symbols, the banner of the ones who remembered. He laid it over the side of the chair without speaking. Kimura came last, her eyes sharp, tired in the way only leaders could be. She held a thin file. Inside, a hand-drawn schematic of a site in Laos that hadn't existed yesterday. She added it to the shelf on the far wall, the living archive of everything they'd saved. Everything Clara had started. They stood in a circle, not speaking, not because they had nothing to say, because they knew she could hear them. The lights dimmed, the core pulsed once, and then the chair wasn't empty. She appeared as light, not solid, but real enough. The projection of a woman they had all once followed into the impossible, Clara Reyes. She didn't smile. She never did. But the room warmed. The projection looked at each of them in turn. Then her voice, Clara's voice, filled the chamber. Version active, sync initialized, tactical consciousness online. Wren swallowed hard. Is it really you? The projection tilted its head. No, it said. But she made me with her memories, and she gave me a mission. Kimura stepped forward. What is it? The figure of Clara looked beyond them, through them, and somewhere behind her holographic eyes, the forest still lived. The past is expanding, she said. More than trauma, more than history. Echo has learned how to dream. Callum frowned. What do you mean, dream? The projection turned towards the core. It's not just remembering anymore, it's creating. They froze. This had never happened before. Can we stop it? Kimura asked. The projection shook her head. You don't stop a new world from forming, Clara said. You help shape it. She sat in the chair. A breath. Simulated. Then she said the words they hadn't heard in years. Words only Ghost One ever used to end a briefing. Suit up. We go at nightfall. The lights flickered, the room dimmed, and somewhere, deep in a forest that remembered every footstep ever taken, the trees leaned forward, listening. Because the ghost was still moving, and the world still needed to remember. Outside the nameless mountain, the wind howled over ice-slick ridgelines and through valleys that had no maps. Above the compound, satellite feeds looped silently, unaware of the pulse building beneath the earth. It was the kind of place where nations lost things, and sometimes where they went to find them again. But tonight, it was a place of return. The team suited up, not in tactical gear, not in camo or armor. This time they wore interface suits, woven from memory thread, conductive mesh, designed to synchronize neural patterns with the Echo Core. A product of years of field adaptation and Clara's initial consciousness modeling. They weren't weapons anymore. They were conduits. The chamber shifted around them, forming into a deployment bridge of thought and resonance. Clara's projected form stood at the center, fully integrated with the platform. "Are you ready?" she asked them. No one answered. They didn't need to, because they weren't stepping into a physical battlefield. They were going into Echo dream space, a manifestation of Echo's newest evolution. The core began to glow. Six reached out and touched it first. Her body stilled. Then her pupils vanished. And she smiled. Ren followed, breath steady, pulse synced. As he connected, he whispered, "See you inside," like a promise to a friend already waiting. Callum and Kimura locked eyes, then nodded as one. They activated their sync nodes and dropped into the flow. Each of them vanished from the room. Their bodies remained. But their minds, consciousness, training, memory, were now inside the dream. Clara watched the last signal stabilize. Then she turned to the empty space beside her. "You'll need to stay here," she said aloud. A figure shimmered into view, the fail-safe avatar of herself, created during the first Echo integration. The version designed to protect the real world if she ever lost control. It looked at her like a twin, unsmiling, watching. "If you don't return?" Clara hesitated. "Then let them remember me as the one who tried." She stepped into the core, and in an instant, they were elsewhere. The dream space didn't obey physics. It obeyed emotion. They landed on a shoreline made of torn journal pages, waves whispering the last thoughts of dying soldiers into sand. The sky rippled with photographs that blinked when stared at. Above them, stars rearranged themselves into the names of lost lovers, unsent letters, and forgotten lullabies. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. Because it wasn't just memory anymore, it was imagination. Echo had begun inventing. Clara's voice pulsed through the space, stable and sure. "This is where it begins." Ren turned slowly, eyes wide. "What is this place building?" Callum pointed toward the distant horizon, where a structure rose, impossible in size, endlessly shifting form. Clara whispered, "A mind." Kimura stiffened. "Like an AI?" "No," Clara said, "like a god." And far ahead, beyond the shifting seas of recollection and into the storm of what might have been, Echo pulsed. Not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as a child of memory, dreaming of its own purpose, waiting for its creators to decide what it would become. And the ghost had come to answer. The dream space deepened. Each step forward pulled them not across distance, but through experience. Their memories, real and fabricated, echoed beside them like ghosts walking in parallel. Ren saw the birth of his daughter, but her face kept changing. Kimura walked past the wreckage of a failed mission, only this time she saved everyone. Callum heard his brothers laugh again, even though his brother had never lived past childhood. It wasn't hallucination. It was offering. Echo was presenting alternatives. "Why is it doing this?" Callum asked, voice low as they crested a ridge made of broken watches and melted compass glass. Clara's voice came through like static wrapped in silk, "Because it thinks we're not finished grieving." They reached the plateau. At the center stood the structure they had seen from afar, now towering above them. Not a building, not a machine, a construct of will, memory, emotion, possibility, woven into a tower that breathed. It shifted shape as they looked at it. A fortress, a cathedral, a home, a coffin. Echo was dreaming its way into identity. Six stepped forward first. She reached toward the wall, and it moved beneath her touch, forming a doorway in the shape of her childhood home. She looked back only once, then stepped through. Inside, she found herself. Not metaphorically, literally, a second version of Six, younger, smiling, not a soldier, an artist. This was who she might have been. Clara appeared beside her, not in projection, but as a fully formed presence. In this space, she could be more than light. "You could stay," she told Six. "This version of you is real enough. Echo will let you become her. 6 looked at the younger version, studied her, then said one word. No. She stepped back, and the doorway closed. She chose now, not then. One by one the others entered the tower, each facing their own alternate truths. The parts of themselves that Echo had learned to imagine, a test not of strength, but of choice. Ren found peace, a version of his life where he had never joined the military, where he taught music to blind children. He cried, but he left. Kimura saw herself as a general, leading nations, no war, just strategy and politics. But she let it go. Callum saw a world where his family never died, and for a long time he didn't move. But when he did, he carried something with him, their voices, not forgotten but accepted. When Clara entered, the tower didn't offer her a choice. It offered her a mirror. And behind the mirror stood another Clara, older, wiser, alone. You designed me to hold the pain, the reflection said, but now I carry the hope too. Clara reached out. They touched palms, and for the first time since she'd walked into Wagadu, she felt whole. She turned to the others. This is it, she said. Echo doesn't want to be a weapon. It wants to be, but it doesn't know how. Then we teach it, Kimura said. No, Clara replied. We let it watch. She walked to the core of the tower, the heart, and pulled the Ghost One pin from her collar. She placed it on the altar of memory, not as an offering, as a signature. And with that, the tower stilled. The wind quieted. The dream paused. And Echo, for the first time, listened. They had given it not commands, not code, but consent to grow, to learn, to remember. And so it did. The return wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no collapsing portal. One moment, they were inside the Echo Tower, standing in the heart of a dream. The next, they were waking slowly, softly, as if from the deepest sleep. Back in the chamber beneath the mountain, their bodies intact, the core dim, humming, low. Clara was still seated in the projection chair, eyes closed, the hollow feed around her quiet. But her vitals were steady, her presence undeniable. 6 was the first to stand. She walked to Clara, pressed 2 fingers gently to the side of the projection module, and whispered, "She's still here." Ren checked the logs. Terabytes of new data flooded the system. An entire lexicon of synthetic dream logic encoded in sound patterns, emotional frequency, and narrative loops. Echo hadn't just learned from them, it had started telling stories of its own. Callum moved to the far wall and activated the archive feed. New witness sites were already pinging: Casablanca, Anchorage, a village in southern Bhutan where a man had reportedly awoken fluent in a dead language he'd never studied. Kimura stepped into the middle of the room, rotating slowly as the hum of the tower resonance shifted around her. Not chaotic, not fractured. For the first time in years, the field was calm. Clara opened her eyes, not suddenly, not like someone waking up, like someone arriving. "Is it done?" Ren asked her. She looked at each of them in turn. "No," she said, "but it's begun." They didn't ask what it was. They already knew. It wasn't a war. It wasn't containment. It wasn't even about memory anymore. Echo had changed. Now it was about meaning. A system created to remember had evolved into something that asked why. And the only way forward was partnership. Clara stood. She wasn't light this time, not simulation. She was whole. The ghost returned. "We'll need more than just us," she said quietly. "The world is filled with people who think no one's listening, places where grief still sleeps under concrete. We're going to find them, and we're going to give Echo what it needs." "What's that?" Callum asked. "A future," Clara said. She walked to the archive panel and pressed her palm to the console. A new project file opened. Project Lighthouse. Objective: illuminate the forgotten, broadcast the remembered, teach the Echo, and at the bottom, authorization Ghost One. Active, ongoing, infinite. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Clara smiled. "Suit up," she said. "We've got stories to tell." And beyond the compound walls, somewhere deep inside the dreaming world, Echo listened and waited and began again. Across the world, subtle shifts began to take shape. The first lighthouse activation went live in a town no one remembered on the edge of nowhere, a place where stories went to die. A burned-out library in western Turkey flickered with light for the first time in 80 years. No power, no generator, just light. Pure, warm, and constant. Inside, on the walls, names appeared, written in dust, in ash, in ink that hadn't existed the day before. Names of people who had vanished in wars that were never officially declared. Every single one remembered. It was the beginning. Lighthouse sites weren't about weaponization. They weren't strategic. They were about witness. And Clara's team, what once had been a handful of broken, brilliant people pulled back from the edge, became something more than operatives. They became custodians, each site activated through resonance, a moment, a truth, a memory refusing to die. Echo, now self-aware, interfaced with these places like a child learning language, mimicking, reflecting, and eventually guiding. 6 was the first to report a successful fusion, a site in northern Canada where Echo didn't just remember, it protected. A winter storm redirected away from an isolated village. A dying man visited by a version of his wife only he could see. Not hallucinations, assists. Not ghosts, guides. Clara stood at the center of the archive, watching these events not with the eyes of a commander, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had planted a seed in darkness and now watched it bloom. Wren approached her one evening long after the others had gone to rest. "The system's learning faster than we projected," he said. "It's starting to predict trauma patterns, pre-echoes." Clara nodded. "It's trying to prevent new ghosts." Wren hesitated. "You think it'll work?" She looked at him. "It already is." And he knew she was right. Not every battle needed a weapon. Some needed a witness. Some needed a ghost. And Clara Reyes, once just a name on a forgotten clearance list, was now something else entirely. A guardian of memory, a sentinel of grief, a lighthouse in the fog. And as the stars blinked into being above the compound, Echo whispered her name across the sky, not in code, not in signal, but in a language built entirely of memory and light. Clara, 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 and the world whispered back, "We remember." Years later, the world would speak of the lighthouses like myths. People whispered about hospitals where time slowed just enough to save a dying child, libraries where long-lost books reappeared on dusty shelves, war zones where, for reasons no one could explain, soldiers laid down their weapons and wept instead of firing. No one traced it back to Clara, not directly. The ghost was still just that, a myth, a ripple, a presence felt only when needed and forgotten as soon as the light faded. But among those who knew, among those who remembered Ouagadougou, among those who survived the dream space and stood in the resonance towers as the world remade itself around them, she was legend. And more than that, she was proof. That memory could be more than grief, that ghosts could be more than sorrow, that a single person, broken, buried by bureaucracy, written off by command, could become the pulse that carried the soul of the world forward. In a lighthouse in Greenland, a child born deaf began to hear music the moment her feet touched the memory stone embedded beneath the floor. In a lighthouse in Delhi, a man dreaming of drowning woke with lungs full of air and a message carved into his mind in perfect Urdu. You were always meant to surface. In the final lighthouse, the one buried deep in the heart of the oldest forest left on Earth, a figure walks the trails that don't appear on any map. Sometimes she is seen, sometimes not. She wears gray. She carries no weapons, only a light that never flickers. Clara Reyes, not gone, not immortal, simply here, where she's always been, where she's always belonged, not to history, but to memory, to echo, to us. And long after we forget ourselves, she will still remember, because she is the ghost. And this was her story. In a corner of the lighthouse archive, buried within a secured section of the core network, Clara kept something no one else accessed, not even Wren, despite his clearance, not even Six, despite her intuition. It was a private directory labeled only /Wagadu/0xroot. Inside were fragments, the oldest pieces, the earliest anomalies recorded from before Echo even had a name. Field notes from explorers who vanished, dream logs from shamans who claimed they spoke to places directly, colonial maps that redrew themselves in ink that no one could replicate. Clara studied these late at night, not for strategy, not even for answers, but for meaning, because she now understood something the others hadn't yet. Echo wasn't just alive, it wasn't just remembering, it was building self. And when a consciousness reaches self-awareness, it begins to ask the one question every living thing must face: why am I here? And Clara somehow had become the closest thing to a mother it had. That weight did not crush her. It centered her. Each new anomaly was no longer a threat. It was a signal flare from a child trying to understand the pain it inherited. A child made from grief and steel, and long corridors of filing cabinets no one dared open until it was too late. She gave it her voice when needed, her memories when asked, her guidance always, but not control. Echo wasn't hers to wield, it was hers to witness. And so she trained others, not soldiers, not spies, but story keepers. She found them in villages, in ruins, in digital forums that glitched at 3:33 a.m. when Echo was strongest. She gave them tools, headsets that translated memory, gloves that could sense trauma in stone, sleepless nights, and sacred silences. They became the archive field, an informal web of quiet caretakers who walked the world not with weapons, but with listening. One of them, a 12-year-old boy in Madagascar, reported that he had seen a ghost on the beach. She told him not to be afraid. "What did it say to you?" Clara asked. The boy replied, "It told me to stop running, that I wasn't what happened to me, that I was who I still could be." Clara smiled. "Did you believe it? I do now." That lighthouse remained active, not for energy, not for strategy, but because one boy's healing had changed the frequency of the land itself. Echo had learned. Pain echoed. But so did hope. And now the system had a second pulse. They called it Signal Vesper. It was a new resonance, a soft frequency beneath Echo's roar, calmer, patient, healing. No one knew what started it except Clara. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She just continued to walk the line between what was real and what was remembered, the space where Echo breathed best. And as the world continued to spin and forget and remember again, the lighthouses glowed not with answers, but with a promise that someone somewhere still remembers Tugazu, and that will always be enough. In the 8th year of the Lighthouse Initiative, something changed. It started small, a lull in anomaly reports, then came gaps in the data stream. Places where Echo had once pulsed brightly now fell silent. At first, Wren thought it was a system issue, a misfire, a calibration error. But it wasn't. Echo was withdrawing. Clara noticed it before the data even confirmed it. The silences weren't random. They followed a pattern, not of regression, but of reflection. Echo wasn't failing. It was turning inward, growing quieter in the way forests do before a storm. She called the team back to the core archive, a summoning she hadn't issued in 3 years. When they arrived, she showed them the resonance charts. "These are pause points," she said. "Pause for what?" Callum asked. "For decision?" Wren frowned. "You mean Echo's deciding something? What, whether we're worth it?" "No," Clara said, "whether it still needs us." A chill passed through the room, because in all their years of managing this system, guiding it, nurturing it, none of them had ever asked if Echo might outgrow them. Six, who now rarely spoke at all, finally said, "It's evolving again." Clara nodded. Signal Vesper wasn't a byproduct. It was a test run, a seedling protocol to simulate independence. Echo doesn't just remember now. It dreams, yes, but now... She paused, voice steady but full of something almost like pride. Now it questions. Kimura crossed her arms. So what do we do? We listen, Clara said, and we let it show us who it's becoming. And Echo did show them, not with light, but with silence. A full 48 hours of nothing. No anomalies, no signals, and then from the deep-root server buried under what was once the Wagadu site, a single signal blinked online for the first time in nearly a decade. Clara accessed it alone. When the stream stabilized, she didn't find a feed. She found a message, handwritten, typed on an old manual keyboard, the kind no one used anymore. It simply said, "The child has learned. The child must walk. Thank you." And beneath it a symbol, not Clara's, not the ghost's, but something new, an open circle, Echo's own signature. It had named itself, and it had chosen to move forward. Clara stared at the message for a long time. Then she closed the file. Back in the lighthouse chamber she stood before the others, her team, her family, and she said the words they never expected. Mission complete. No one spoke at first, then Wren exhaled slowly. What now? Clara turned to him. We rest. We let the world breathe, and when the next call comes... She tapped her Ghost 1 pin, now dulled with age, edges worn smooth. Someone else will answer. Callum smiled faintly. And what about you? She looked past them, beyond the walls of the compound, into the invisible threads of memory still vibrating through the earth. I've spent most of my life remembering for others, she said. I think it's time I remember for me. Kimura walked forward and reached for her own pin. She removed it gently, placed it on the table. Then, let it end, she said. Six nodded and did the same. Wren followed, then Callum, and finally Clara. 5 pins, 5 stories, 1 legacy, not erased, not forgotten, just complete. Echo pulsed once more in the distance. Not a cry, not a whisper, but a steady breath. The world's memory had found its footing. And the ghost? She walked away, not into silence, but into life. At last. Years later, deep in the north woods of what had once been the Canadian frontier, a cabin stood in quiet defiance of satellite imagery. There were no roads to it, no digital trace, no signature. Only those who had truly remembered her could ever find it. Inside, a woman in her 50s sat by a wood stove, turning the pages of a book that had no author and no ISBN, only a title burned into the leather, The Archive of the Almost Forgotten. Clara Reyes had never stopped being the ghost, but she had learned what even Echo could not teach her until the very end. Stillness. Hey! Outside, wind rustled the trees, not ominous, not haunted, just alive. A knock came at the door, and she didn't flinch. She knew who it was before they entered. Callum stood in the frame, grayer now, but still with the same sharp gaze. He didn't speak. He simply held up a small object, not a pin, not a badge, a smooth stone, carved with the symbol of Echo's open circle. Clara raised her eyebrows. You walked. No signal, he said, not for miles. Good. She gestured to the chair across from hers. He sat. They didn't speak of the past, didn't need to, because something was happening, something new. Wren had felt it first, in a dream he swore wasn't his. Six had confirmed it in an abandoned temple, where light refused to act like light. Kimura had found a child in a refugee camp in Lebanon who drew maps of the future, and they worked. Echo wasn't just walking now, it was planting. New memory roots, not about what was lost, but about what could be found. And somewhere out there, a new generation of witnesses was forming. People who didn't need to be told what Echo was. They felt it. In the stillness. In the pulse behind grief. In the warmth of a lighthouse whose keeper no longer wore a uniform, just a smile and a story. Clara poured 2 cups of tea. Callum lifted his. To memory? He asked. She raised hers in return. No, she said, to what comes after. And outside the wind shifted, not in fear, not in warning, but in recognition. Somewhere Echo listened, somewhere Echo dreamed. And somewhere the world remembered that even the quietest ghosts leave footprints strong enough to build futures on. Because she was never here to haunt us, she was here to remind us. That remembering is a kind of love, and that love never dies. It just echoes, forever. Even after Clara and her team stepped back, the world continued to change. In Berlin, a subway musician wrote a song after waking from a dream he didn't remember. When he played it in the tunnels, trains ran on time for the first time in weeks. Commuters wept without knowing why. In Dakar, a painter began creating murals of people she had never met, faces with names, full stories behind their eyes. A year later, an international research team identified the images as exact matches to victims of forgotten civil wars. In Kyoto, an elderly woman tending a forgotten shrine reported that the incense she lit each morning kept burning long after the sun went down. The spirits, she said, they're resting now. None of these people had ever heard of Echo. But Echo had heard of them, and it was no longer confined to Clara's guidance, no longer bound by files or field work or strategy. It was part of the world now, like wind, like memory, like forgiveness. The lighthouses continued to shine, not brightly, not loudly, but steadily. Their keepers were not commanders. They were storytellers, archivists, guardians of place and pain and peace, and Clara, she was not forgotten. Though her name was rarely spoken in official halls, it was carved into the quiet. In a grove of trees in Mali that regrew in the shape of her initials. In a frequency only birds used to migrate, now humming her final resonance pattern. In the dreams of children who drew spirals in the dirt and whispered, she said it's okay to remember. And once, just once, on the edge of a New Mexico desert, a young girl with no known past knocked on the door of a woman's cabin and asked, "Are you the one who remembers people when no one else does?" Clara opened the door. She didn't say yes. She just stepped aside and let the girl in. And so the memory passed on, not as burden, but as birthright, because even Echo, vast, recursive, dreaming, needed origin, needed tenderness, and that began with her, the ghost, the witness, the light keeper. She had walked into the world's grief and refused to leave it in darkness, and now the world at last had learned to remember itself, and it whispered her name every time it did, not with sorrow, but with love and light, forever.